Колеги, вітання.
Dear colleagues, Ukrainian Crisis Media Center keeps on moving, and now we are inviting Deputy Chief Monitor of OSCE, Mr. Hook.
Good morning. The situation in Donbass, as in previous week, has remained tense and unpredictable since I spoke the last time with you. Whilst we observed fewer ceasefire violations at and around the Donetsk airport, we noted indications that the violence was spreading. We had previously frequently recorded explosions along the Kalmius River, north of Mariupol. But this week the scale was decidedly different. On Saturday, for instance, in the space of 90 minutes we recorded 99 explosions in Novotroysk and 32 explosions in Starokhnaktivka. The day before, in Novotroysk, in the Luhansk region, we heard 8 explosions. This spread of violence was actually quite evident to me last week when I visited the region. In areas such as Zaitsevo and Pavlopil, I have seen a build-up of military positions. While on patrol, I did observe a school in so-called DPR-controlled Zaitsevo, which was turned into a fortified position by the so-called DPR. At the risk of repeating myself, I think it's safe to say that heavy weapons have not been fully withdrawn from the contact line. The so-called DPR gave us some baseline information this week, following the earlier example of the Ukraine Armed Forces and the so-called LPR. Dehowever, the number of weapons declared by them as withdrawn is small. Dear colleagues, therefore I wonder how there was so much violence over the last year and a half if these numbers listed reflect reality. As you know, this week I was in Minsk with the Chief Monitor, Ambassador Apakan, where he chaired the Trilateral Contact Group working group on security issues, in which 12 priority areas for mine clearance were identified. There was some tentative progress made with the sides agreeing to provide security and ensure there is no firing in these areas. Among these areas are the Vulkharisk power station, the carbonate water supply project, and a pressure pipeline between Mayorsk and Khorlivka, and others. Demining all of these areas is meant to support the repair of key infrastructure. Frankly, this agreement must be adhered to. This week we have seen yet again the indiscriminate effects of mines and unexploded ordnance. In one of those identified priority areas, close to Khorlivka, 2 members of a demining team were injured when they tripped a recently placed booby trap. The SMM also received information that 2 Ukraine Armed Forces soldiers had been killed and 7 injured when their armed personnel carrier hit an improvised explosive device in Opitne. No injury or death is more tragic than another. But when children are involved, and I think we all agree that a line then has been crossed. In Teplichne, just west of Luhansk, the SMM spoke to a woman whose 17-year-old son had to have his leg amputated following a landmine incident. The sites, however, continue to use these indiscriminate weapons despite such casualties and despite commitments not to do so, which they made in the Minsk Memorandum. This week we saw them do this in Marinka and Yasinovata. In the latter location, the mines were unmarked and the recent covering of snow made them difficult to see. Casualties from mines and unexploded ordnance are just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath the surface, there is the fear that they instill because they are so indiscriminate and unseen. If that fear is not removed, in particular from the 12 priority areas identified in Minsk, repair work on critical infrastructure will remain undone. Everywhere, on both sides of the contact line, people are without water, electricity, and gas. We are not just entering the coldest time of the year. Soon, we will all celebrate New Year and Christmas. As well as a peace, it is everyone's obligation to ensure that people who have suffered too much already are at least warm in their homes during the upcoming festive period. There are those willing to help. On Monday, for example, our monitors observed a non-governmental organization distributing winterization materials to people in Solote. Such organizations, however, continue to face difficulties operating in areas not controlled by the government. I was in a hospital in the Balcova last week. It is shocking to see hard-working, highly qualified medical personnel unable to provide the necessary care because of a shortage of basic medicine and equipment. In the 21st century, it is hard to believe that a modern hospital in the Balcova is short of anesthetics.
Враховуючи обмеження, що накладаються на людей, які намагаються доставити гуманітарну допомогу, з іронією і важким серцем СММ продовжує спостерігати велику кількість вугілля, що покидає територію, що не контролюється урядом. 12-13 грудня, наприклад, СММ спостерігало 230 вантажівок, навантажені вугіллям, на пункту перетину Мар'їнка, що чекали на виїзд з України. Також кожен день ми бачимо, що великі черги на пунктах перетину. Вони стоять на холоді. 15 грудня, наприклад, на пункті Березове, на південно-західній частині Донецька ми спостерігали 800 машин, які стояли у черзі, щоб переїхати на територію, що контролюється урядом. Ми відкрили 2 передові бази патрулювання в Горлівці і Дебальцево. Як очікується, це дозволить нам проводити спостереження на більшій території і дозволить нам укладати більш збалансовані і неупереджені звіти.
In experiencing other difficulties, many interlocutors in public institutions controlled by the so-called DPR have been insisting that we received permission of the so-called DPR prior to allowing us to visit or even speak to them. At the minimum, the onus is certainly on the so-called DPR to clarify with these people, letting them publicly know that no such requirement exists. When they do so, they should also emphasize the SMM's freedom of movement, which is guaranteed in its mandate and in the Minsk Agreement. A more serious challenge to our freedom of movement, however, has this week emerged at checkpoints controlled by the so-called DPR. In what is now a near systematic practice, armed members of the so-called DPR have been insisting on unspecified authorization from the so-called DPR. We always had problems going through these checkpoints, but until now, a call to people higher up in the chain was usually sufficient to resolve the situation. This week, all attempts to reach such people within the so-called DPR failed. These are the same people who signed up to provisions of the Minsk Memorandum, one of which guarantees the right to the SMM to move freely. This practice and the apparent tolerance of the denials by the leadership of the so-called DPR must stop now. If it does not, the SMM's ability to monitor the ceasefire and the withdrawal of weapons from the contact line, to say nothing about other mandated duties, will be severely compromised. Now listen very careful. When people ask us why we have been unable to verify explosions and the resultant damage and casualties, when they ask where the SMM was when facilitation and oversight of demining was required, when they wonder why no one was there to record the unfolding humanitarian crisis, I will have a very simple answer. Ask the people that control Donetsk city. And lastly, the update on our mission numbers. We have at the moment 669 international monitors, of which 534 are working in the eastern part of the country. We also have 286 Ukrainian colleagues and 76 other international staff. Thank you, and I will be pleased to take questions should you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Hook. Dear colleagues, are there any questions or clarifications? If there are no questions, we're going to finish our press conference right here. Thank you, Mr. Hook, and looking forward to meeting you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Колеги, я нагадую, що наш наступний брифінг о 10-й годині.
Our next briefing